In a recent tweet, United States Senator Bernie Sanders renewed his calls for universal health care, saying in part, in the midst of the current set of horrors, war, oligarchy, pandemics, inflation, climate change, etc., we must continue the fight to establish health care as a human right, not a privilege.
Political journalist Rebecca Azor and advisor for Renew Democracy Initiative and former Republican strategist Rina Shah are here to weigh in. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
And so, Rebecca, it's interesting to think back to a time when Democrats, or at least a wing of the Democratic Party, were more associated with calls like Medicare for All. It seems like Republicans have done a good job of kind of framing Democrats now as the kind of the party of the party of cancel culture, of culture wars, of defund the police, of whatever the abolish ICE, whatever the thing is that they're getting hit with, and that kind of history of fighting for everybody, so Medicare for All, for instance, is seeming to get lost. Do you see a chance for Democrats to reach back to that and go back to those roots, or do you think that this is just kind of a relic of a past Democratic Party and we're in a new era now?
That's a great question, honestly, because there was a time that I believed that the Democratic Party at one point at least stood on a united front. There was a time that I believed that was a thing. But, in recent days and recent times, looking at how some of the, the Democratic leaders are voting against things like healthcare for all or voting rights for, to everyone. And I, seeing that there are Democratic leaders, the leaders who have the most pull are the ones that are at the forefront joining in on the bipartisan look of things with Republicans to shoot down things like Medicare for All. And I don't think that we're going to be in a time, thanks Bernie for tweeting that out, but I don't know if we're in a place where Democrats are really at a united front to really pull that or really care for it. I don't think it's the first thing on their agenda is to get people health care for all. If it was something, then during the pandemic, they would have fought for that. During the pandemic, we lost so many lives and people who could have had, their health, pushed to the forefront. Instead, a lot of people died because they didn't have the proper health care. Because I recently saw a story of somebody losing their son over $20. We should not be having to choose, to pay our rent over, paying our health care. This should not be a matter that we should even be talking about. We shouldn't be losing people. If it was really something that was on Democrats' minds, we would have seen that more of a fight in the last 2 years. And that's something that I just haven't seen.
Rina, I think the Republicans are very good at demonizing some policies on the left, progressive policies, Democratic policies, often correctly. They're pointing out, from my perspective at least, things that are real issues with some of these policies. And then they're really good at also pointing out some of the absurdities and the extremism in some of the progressive kind of social policy, the cancel culture adjacent stuff, but then not really offering an affirming agenda for themselves. That, well, here's what we're going to do instead. It's just, it's pure own the libs kind of fantasizing. Is that ever going to end up being a problem for the Republican Party, that they're not really a party of ideas so much as like an own the libs party? And that can be successful for a long while, I think. But at some point, they're going to have to actually govern, maybe, or maybe not.
Well, the party of no branding continues, it seems, Robbie. This is a moment in which we see it. Medicare for All. What a great moment in which Republicans can push back with actual criticisms of these Medicare for All proposals that we've all heard about. I mean, Bernie ran, Elizabeth Warren ran. People who love Medicare for All have introduced it to the American public, but Republicans have never really got down and said, this is what you would hate about Medicare for All. This is why Medicare for All is no good for America. And that's what is frustrating for somebody like myself who has never liked Medicare for All. And let me tell you why. It would fundamentally, restructure the American economy. We are talking about some good parts here, things such as, private insurers saying we're no longer going to, cover that visit to this one particular doctor. I went through that recently with my obstetrician. I wanted to deliver my baby with the group that I've delivered with in the past, and they no longer accept the insurance they accepted just 4 years ago. That was highly frustrating. I did not want to find a new group, and I found a way to make it work. But that was, I mean, I live in a place of privilege to be able to do that, to find a way to be able to still afford the cost of going to the same group, though my insurance doesn't cover it anymore. It was many nights of fights with my partner about how to afford it, but I was so hell bent on that. These are not the fights that average Americans should be having. So I want our audience to know I don't oppose Medicare for All because I oppose every bit of it. There are some serious questions I think Republicans have missed the train on. How much would it cost? How to even have the policy discussion and get us to a place of figuring out the cost. And then on top of all of it, we have some serious questions as well about what the pandemic did to accessibility and portability of healthcare, particularly for folks in rural America and in urban pockets that just frankly don't even go for preventive care. So we need to find a way to have a responsible discussion, but it feels like it's lost on both sides. Again, kudos to Senator Sanders for continuing to carry the water. I mean, steady on the drumbeat, he remains. But I just don't see this going anywhere fast. And I don't know that there's a real appetite in the electorate to have our elected leaders, frankly, bring it to them the way it's been brought to us in the past couple of years. There's just no appetite, it seems.
Rebecca, do you think that Democrats lack credibility on this, not just the healthcare question, but more broadly, based on this being their second time in a decade of controlling the White House and both chambers of Congress, and pushing through this major American Rescue Plan, including child tax credit, and they were going to make it permanent, and they floated all of these things that pulled through the roof that they're going to do for the American people, and then it turns out, well, actually, they're not going to do that. Joe Manchin doesn't like it. Kyrsten Sinema won't say what she thinks of it. And so, but trust us, next time we're going to do it. So how difficult is it going to be for them to make that, really trust us, really next time we're going to really make it happen?
Well, it honestly, for lack of a better word, it sucks for them, right? Because this is what we are seeing. We're at a time where I've said before on the show that a lot of us are monitoring, we're watching, we're now a bit more educated. Even the people who usually don't know who the leaders are, they're getting educated on who the leaders are, on why they should vote, on why these people should be seated. And if they're looking at these reasons that these Democratic leaders or people who are supposed to be supporting them and making sure that they're taken care of are not listening to their actual needs, they should worry that they won't be seated or they won't be supported by their constituents in the following years. And I think that they are dropping the ball. What we hear the conversation surrounding, especially when it comes for Medicare for All, universal health care, is basically that, we shouldn't be having to choose. People are dying over things like $10 or whatever. And having the privilege to say, I didn't want to switch over my doctor is one thing, but not being able to have any Medicare for All or any health care at all at any point, the option to go to the doctor. This is what we're seeing from a lot of people in urban areas or and those kind of conversations. These are the conversations that we're having. Also, it's looking like these Democratic leaders are siding with people who, these corporate healthcare leaders who are capitalizing so many times on people who can and cannot get health care, who can afford it and who cannot afford it. So these are the things that people are struggling with right now. And these Democratic leaders are literally turning a blind eye or giving their constituents the cold shoulder. And this is what they'll remember. This is what people will remember as people are looking to be reseated or to be reelected. And this is going to be something that a lot of people think of, especially for those like Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin. It's like, you can't be quiet on these things. You got to pick a side. And you got to do exactly the things that you promised when people sat you down. It can't just be something that you run off of. And then when the time comes, it's like, yeah, we don't care about that anymore. This is still something that this is still an issue. It's still here. It's still something that needs to be talked about and rectified in some way, shape, or form. And this is not what we're seeing from our leaders.
Well, Rebecca and Rena, thank you so much for joining us.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll be back with more Rising right after this.